Hello everyone, this is Sri Charanya from the Department of IT, Fatima College, Madurai. Here in this video, we are going to see a topic called DHTML in the subject Web Technology. So, what are all the objectives in this videos are: first, the introduction of DHTML, next one CSS, that is cascading style sheets, DHTML document object model and collections, event handling, filters and transitions, data binding. So what the DHTML stands for? So it stands for dynamic HTML and it is completely different from the HTML tags. So this DHTML is based on the properties of HTML, JavaScript, CSS and DOM. DOM is nothing but it's the document object model which is used to access the individual elements of a documents which help us in making our content so dynamically. And that's what we are saying, that it's the combination of HTML, CSS, JS and DOM. DHTML is used to create an interactive and animated web pages that are generated in the real time, so it is also called as a dynamic web pages. Next one is CSS, that is cascading style sheets. So what does it mean? It's a simply designed language intended to simplify the process of making web pages presentable and interactable. That CSS allows the user to apply the styles to the web pages. Most importantly, it enables the user to do the independent of the HTML that makes up the each web pages. And also it is easy to learn and understood, but it provides a powerful control over the presentation of an HTML document. What are all the advantages? So the first advantage of CSS is it saves the time. So we can write the CSS coding once and we can use the same sheet in multiple HTML documents at the different times. So for next one is it is easily maintainable. That is, to make a global changes, simply we can change the style and all elements which is associated in the web pages will also be updated automatically. Third one is the search engines. Now CSS is considered as a clean coding technique, which means the search engines won't have to struggle to read its content. It's easy to readable content only for the search engines. And next one, it is the superior styles to the HTML document. That is, CSS has a much wider array of attributes than HTML, so we can give a fair better look to our HTML document in comparison with the HTML attributes. And next one is it supports the offline browsing. The CSS stores the web applications locally with the help of the offline cache memory. So using of this, we can view the offline web pages also. Next we move on to the CSS syntax. So how its syntax follows is, it comprises the style rules that are interpreted by the browser, and then we can apply it to the correspondent element in our document. Each style rule set contains a selector and the declaration block. The selector points to the HTML element we want to style. The declaration block contains one or more declarations separated by the semicolons. Each declaration includes the CSS property name and a value separated by a colon. For example, here we have used color is the property and blue is the value. Similarly, we use the font size as a property and 12px is the value for the font size. So these two values will be applied to a selector called h1. The CSS declaration always end with a semicolon and the declaration blocks are surrounded by the curly braces. So this is an example of the CSS coding. So the CSS coding can be applied in the HTML documents in different ways. First one is the inline style sheet, that is inline CSS will look like a below, that is it's coding as h1 style equal to color colon green Fatima College h1, which should be inside in the HTML coding itself. Next style we can add the CSS is internal style. So this is the example coding for the internal style sheet. And the third way is externally we can add the CSS code into our HTML document. That is, we can create a coding and save the file as in the extension of .css. And whenever we need that, we include that into the style between the style tag in our HTML document. And next one, what are all the disadvantage of CSS? In CSS, there is a cross browsers issue. If design anything and check on Chrome, it looks the perfect. But that does not mean it will look the same in other browser. So then we have to add the script for that browser also. So there is a lack of security in CSS too. And what are all the properties included in the CSS? So CSS color property is used to set the color of the HTML documents, and this property is used to set the font color, background color, etc. So this is the syntax. By using the same header tag, the CSS background properties are used to define the background effects for the elements. So these are some of the background properties: background color, background image, background repeat, background attachment, and background position. So each having the syntax, that is background color, it specifies the color of an element, and image specifies the image we can use as a background of an element. By default, the image is repeated, so it covers the entire element. And background repeat is used to repeats the image both horizontally and vertically. To repeat the image horizontally, we use the coordinate called x, and to repeat an image as the vertically, we can use the y. And background attachment, it's used to fix the background images, that is it will not scroll within the page. So that is the syntax: background attachment colon fixed. And what is the background position is, its property is used to set the image to a particular position, and that is the syntax: background repeat, no repeat, and position left or top. Next one is CSS selectors. So selectors are used to select the HTML elements based on their element name, ID, attributes, etc. So it can select one or more elements simultaneously. The element selector in CSS is used to select the HTML elements which is required to be styled. In a selector declaration, there is a name of the HTML element and CSS properties which are to be applied to that element is written inside the brackets, the flower braces. So this is the syntax for that element name and CSS properties. ID selector. We can use the ID as selector, that is used to set the style in a given ID. The ID attribute is unique identifier in the HTML document, and this is the syntax for that and example for that also. And pseudo classes. What is meant by pseudo classes in CSS is, it is a special state of an element. It can be combined with the CSS selector to add an effect to an existing element based on their state. For example, if we want changing the style of an element when the user have over it and when it link is visited. All of this can be done with the pseudo classes in CSS, and this is the syntax for that: selector colon pseudo classes within a bracket properties and values. Next to be a pseudo elements. So it is used to add style in specified part of an element. Example, if we are using a style before or after an element, we can add the element before or after, and this is the syntax. Next one is positioning. So what is meant by positioning is, specifies the type of the positioning of an element. There are different position values: static, relative, fixed, absolute, and sticky. Elements are then positions with the top, bottom, left, and right properties. However, these properties will not work unless the position property is set first. So first we have to set the position, and then we have to mention in which position the elements have to be placed. It also works differently, depends on the position values. So what does in static means? The HTML elements are positioned static by default. So it are not affected by the top, bottom, left, and right properties. And position relative specifies the position, it's in normal position, that is setting the top, right, bottom, and left properties of a relative position element will cause it to be adjust away from its normal position. And next one is fixed. Fixed means an element with the position fixed. The position relative to a viewport, which means it always stays in the same place even if the page is scrolled. The top, right, bottom, and left properties are used with this element. And absolute position is its absolute relative to the nearest position ancestor. Instead of position, we can use the viewport like the fixed type. And however, if an absolute position element have no positioned ancestor, it uses the document body and moves along with the pages scrolling. Next one is sticky. Sticky means it's position based on the user's scroll position. So a sticky element toggles between the relative and fixed position. It's depending upon the scroll position. Next one is CSS filters. So what is filters? What is the use of filters are? It's used to set the visual effect to the text, images and other aspects of the web pages. The CSS filter properties always allows us to access the effects such as color or blur, shifting on the rendering of an element before the element gets displayed. So some of the filter properties are brightness, blur. Brightness means it's used to set the brightness of the element. If it is 0, then it represent completely black, and whereas 100% brightness will give the original one. Blur means it is used to apply the blur effect to the element. If the blur value is not specified, then the default value is 0 will be used. The parameter blur property does not accept the percentage value. And next one is invert. So invert is used to invert the given input images. If its value is 100% value represents the complex inverted and 0 value unchanged the input. Negative values are not allowed here. And next one is saturate. Saturate is used to if the value is set as 0% saturate represent completely unsaturated element, where 100% represents the original one. The value greater than 100 are allowed, that provides the super saturated images. And drop shadow. So it applies the drop shadow effects to input the images. The values here accepted are horizontal shadow, vertical shadow, blur, spread and color. This horizontal and vertical will be represented as H shadow and V shadow. Next one is contrast. Contrast is used to adjust the contrast value of an input images. 0% represents the black image, 100% it's an unchanged input, and without any changes we can give the original images. The value greater than 100% allows will give the less contrast. Next one, opacity. So it is used to apply the transparency of a given input image. If the value for the opacity is 0%, then it indicates completely transparent, whereas 100% gives the original image. And next one is hue rotate. Hue rotate is of the input images. If the perimeter value defines the number of degree around the color circle, the image will be adjusted. The default value here is 0 degree, which represents the original image, and maximum will be is the 360 degree. And grayscale. Grayscale is convert the given input image into the black and white images. 0% value gives the original one, whereas the 100% gives the complete grayscale. It converts the object colors into the 256 shades of gray. Next one is transitions. The transitions effects are added to the change the element gradually from one style to another without using a Flash or JavaScript coding. So we can specify two things to create the CSS transition. One is the CSS property on which you want to add an effect, and the time duration of an effect. So let us take the example with us with the width property and the duration of 3 seconds. Let us example is example coding program will be like this. So we can add the width with the 3 seconds. Next one is DHTML events. So what is meant by events is it's defined as the changing the occurrence of an object. So it is compulsory to add the events in the HTML page. Without events, there will be a no dynamic content on the page. The event is a term in HTML which triggers the action in the web browsers. Suppose any user click on the HTML element, then the JavaScript code associated with that element is executed. Actually, the event handler catches the event performed by the user and then execute the code. Its example of the events are clicking a button, submitting a form. So like this we can use the events. So some of the event and event handlers will be displayed here. So some of the event and event handlers are there. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you so much.